Something unsettling is happening to retirement in Australia. Most Australians believed the system would take care of them. They trusted superannuation, counted on the age pension, assumed property ownership was guaranteed if they worked hard enough. That certainty is evaporating. Baby boomers are discovering that decades of super contributions won't fund the retirements they envisioned. Gen X is watching super fluctuate, while property prices lock them out permanently. Millennials are seeing costs explode faster than super accumulates. Gen Z is entering adulthood buried under HEX debt, paying record rents, wondering if retirement will even exist by the time they reach 67. This isn't just about money. It's about the slow collapse of a promise that defined Australian prosperity: contribute to super, buy a home, work until 67, retire comfortably. That promise is breaking. Most people don't realize how comprehensively it's failed until years past the point where they could have adapted. If daily coverage of economic forces affecting Australian retirement provides value, joining the channel supports continued investigation. The super system illusion. For most Australians, retirement planning means one thing: superannuation. The compulsory system introduced in 1992 promised to revolutionize retirement. Employers contribute on your behalf. The contributions compound over decades. By 67, you've accumulated enough to fund comfortable retirement. The theory sounds perfect. The reality is far messier. Australia's super system now holds $4.3 trillion in assets, fourth largest pension pool globally. Sounds impressive until you examine what individual Australians actually have saved. The average retirement balance is $362,000. Sounds substantial until you realise that's the average, meaning many have far less. Half of Australian men approaching retirement have less than $68,000 in super. Half of women have less than $54,000. According to the Association of Superannuation Funds of Australia, you need $630,000 to fund a comfortable retirement as a single person. The gap between median balances and comfortable retirement isn't incremental. It's catastrophic. For someone with $54,000 in super, the shortfall to comfortable retirement is $576,000, more than 10 times their actual savings. The super system works brilliantly under specific conditions: continuous employment at decent wages for 30+ years, no time off for childcare, no unemployment, no casual or part-time work, no health issues interrupting contributions. For everyone else, which is most Australians, the system delivers mediocrity at best. Emily Carter spent 32 years as a nurse, took time off when her 3 children were young, went part-time so she could be there for school pickups, did everything society told her was responsible. Super balance at 65, $318,000 sounds decent until you realize it's $312,000 short of comfortable retirement. Despite a full career in essential work, the superannuation guarantee rate just reached 12% in July 2025. Excellent for workers starting careers today. For people already approaching retirement, that increase comes too late. They contributed at 9% for most of their careers. Some started at just 3% in the early years. Those lower historical rates compound into massive shortfalls decades later. And here's what really undermines confidence. Super funds are struggling to support the retirement phase. APRA and ASEC's recent report found that many funds provide minimal guidance beyond legal minimums. Fewer than half offer meaningful drawdown strategies. You spend 30-40 years accumulating super, then reach retirement, and the fund essentially says, good luck figuring out how to make this last. More than 1.6 million Australians are already drawing pensions from super. Another 2.5 million will retire in the next decade. Yet only 1 in 3 approaching retirement feel financially confident. Why is this so? Because they've looked at their balances. They've done the mathematics. They've realized the comfortable retirement they were promised simply isn't attainable with what they've accumulated. The super system isn't failing universally. For high-income earners who maximized contributions and benefited from strong market returns, it works well. For everyone else, it's delivering something between disappointment and crisis. The age pension dependence. When super falls short, Australians fall back on the age pension, exactly what the system was designed for. Super as primary income, age pension as supplement. Except it's not working that way. The age pension has transformed from supplemental benefit into primary retirement income for most Australians. Roughly 39% of Australians over 67 receive the full age pension. Another 24% receive a part pension. Do the mathematics, that's 63% of retirees depending on government support as their main or significant income source. The maximum age pension from March 2026 is when $200 fortnightly for singles works out to $31,223 annually. For couples combined, it's $47,070 annually. Now consider what that actually buys. A single person receiving maximum age pension has $31,223 annually to cover housing, food, healthcare, utilities, transport, and everything else. If they own their home outright with no mortgage, that's workable. Not comfortable, but survivable. If they're renting, the mathematics become impossible. Average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Australian capital cities is $470 weekly. In Sydney, it's $560 weekly, translates to $24,240 annually. In Sydney, rent alone consumes 78% of the maximum age pension for Sydney renters. Commonwealth Rent Assistance provides up to $5,600 annually, still leaves Sydney renters paying $8,840 from their pension purely for housing. After paying rent with rent assistance, a single Sydney pensioner has approximately $2,400 annually for everything else. Breaks down to $238 weekly for food, utilities, transport, healthcare, clothing, and every other expense. Not retirement, survival. 2 in 3 retirees who rent in the private market live in poverty. Not a projection. Current reality. Based on actual household spending analysis, over 105,000 age pensioners are currently in rental stress, spending more than 33% of income on housing, even after receiving rent assistance. And it's getting worse. Home ownership rates among poorer Australians approaching retirement are collapsing. Between 1981 and 2021, ownership rates among the poorest 40% of 45 to 54-year-olds fell from 68% to just 54%. Today's low-income renters are tomorrow's renting retirees. Most have minimal retirement savings. More than half of Australians renting as they approach retirement have less than $25,000 in total savings. Stop and process that scenario. You reach 67. You have $20,000 in super. You've been renting your entire working life. You qualify for maximum age pension and rent assistance. Your rent is $450 weekly. After rent and assistance, you have $250 weekly for everything else. Not retirement, barely survival. The age pension was never designed to carry full weight of retirement funding. It was meant to supplement super and home ownership. When super is inadequate and home ownership has disappeared, the pension becomes the only thing standing between retirees and destitution, and the pension itself faces long-term funding pressures. Projections suggest payouts may need to be reduced if no policy changes occur. Doesn't mean the pension disappears, means it could become even less adequate than it already is. Michael Harris worked construction for 38 years. Never earned huge money but solid middle-class income. Rented his entire life because Sydney property prices were always just beyond reach. Super balance at 67, $127,000. Combined with maximum age pension, his annual retirement income is approximately $38,000. His rent is $420 weekly. After rent and rent assistance, he has $1,700 annually for non-housing expenses. Works out to $342 weekly. He's not living comfortably. He's managing one major expense. Car replacement, medical issue, rent increase, and the budget collapses entirely. This is the hidden crisis. Millions of Australians approaching retirement in similar positions. Inadequate super, no property ownership, dependent on an age pension that was never meant to be sole income. The system isn't just failing them. It was never designed to support them in the first place. The rental trap. Here's where Australia's retirement crisis becomes truly brutal. The entire system assumes home ownership by retirement age, super projections, age pension adequacy calculations, comfortable retirement benchmarks all assume you own your home outright. What happens when you don't? Super Consumers Australia recently calculated what renters actually need to retire comfortably. Singles, $659,000 in super. Couples, $786,000 combined. Now compare that to homeowners. Singles need $322,000. Couples need $512,000. Stop and process what that means. Renters need twice as much super to achieve the same standard of living as homeowners. Why is this so? Because housing costs don't disappear in retirement. For homeowners, major housing expenses drop dramatically once the mortgage is paid off. No monthly payments, just rates, insurance, and maintenance. For renters, housing costs continue indefinitely and usually increase annually. The ASA retirement standard now includes figures specifically for renters. A modest retirement basic standard of living better than age pension alone, but still just basics costs $46.06 to $63 annually for single renters. For homeowner singles, $33,386 works out to $13,277 more annually, purely due to rental costs. Over 25 years of retirement, that's 331 tuning, 255 additional expense just for not owning property. And rental costs keep climbing faster than assistance. Commonwealth rent assistance increased by just 2% from September 2024 to September 2025. Rents rose 4.5% in the same period. The gap between assistance and actual costs is widening every single year. This creates vicious mathematics. Renters need more super but typically have less. Lower lifetime earnings correlate with lower super balances and lower home ownership rates. The people who most need large super balances are precisely the people least likely to accumulate them. Olivia Bennett worked retail management for 33 years. Earned decent income, $65,000, $75,000 in her final decade. Never bought property because deposits kept moving beyond reach every time she got close. Watched apartments she could have afforded 10 years ago now cost double. Super at $294,000. According to ASA standards, she needs $659,000 to fund comfortable retirement while renting. Her shortfall, $365,000. There's no strategy that generates that difference. No investment return bridges it. She'll spend retirement in rental stress, gradually depleting inadequate super while hoping it lasts until she qualifies for aged care. Rental cost for retirees means super needs to last longer while being drawn down faster. A homeowner might safely withdraw 4 to 5% annually from super. A renter drawing the same percentage ends up in poverty because housing consumes so much more of each withdrawal. The crisis isn't coming, it's here now. Approximately 325,000 age pensioners currently receive rent assistance. Of those, 32% are in rental stress despite the assistance. Do the mathematics. That's 105,000 pensioners right now experiencing housing cost stress every single month. Not in 5 years, not eventually, right now. And the cohort approaching retirement looks worse. Home ownership rates are falling. Super balances for lower income workers remain inadequate. Rental costs continue rising faster than incomes or pensions. Between 1981 and 2021, home ownership among the poorest 40% of 45-54-year-olds fell from 68% to just 54%. That's not a minor decline. That's the foundation of retirement security crumbling for an entire demographic. These are the people who will retire over the next 10-15 years. They're in their prime earning years right now, and more than half don't own homes. Most never will. The average rent for a one-bedroom in capital cities is $470 weekly, except average hides massive variation. Sydney, $560 weekly. Melbourne, $430 weekly. Brisbane, $450 weekly. Even in cheaper capitals, rent consumes massive portions of pension income. A single pensioner paying average capital city rent of $470 weekly spends $24,240 annually on housing. Maximum age pension is $31,223 annually. Even with rent assistance of $5,600, they're paying $18,840 for housing. Leaves $12,383 for everything else. Food, utilities, transport, healthcare, clothing, phone, internet. Every expense that exists works out to $238 weekly. Try living on $238 weekly in any Australian capital city. Not as a student sharing a house. As a retiree needing regular healthcare, facing mobility limitations, unable to supplement income through additional work. It's not sustainable, which is why 2/3 of retirees who rent live in poverty. The system assumes you'll own your home. If you don't, you've essentially failed the prerequisite for Australian retirement. Everything else, super pension retirement planning, breaks down mathematically when housing costs remain permanent. The poorest 40% of renting households aged 55-64 have less than $40,000 in net financial wealth. That's not super. That's total financial wealth. Super, savings, everything. These are people 5 to 12 years from retirement with $40,000 total and ongoing rental costs that will consume $20,000, $25,000 annually in retirement. Their $40,000 won't last 2 years of rent alone. Forget food, utilities, healthcare, just rent. 2 years. Age pensioners need at least $40,000 in savings just to afford spending $350 weekly on rent, together with age pension and rent assistance. That's enough to rent the cheapest 25% of one-bedroom homes in capital cities. But Australians renting as they approach retirement have little savings. More than half have less than $25,000 total. They don't meet even the minimum threshold to afford bottom quartile rental accommodation. What happens to them? Commonwealth rent assistance gets maxed out at $5,600 annually. Doesn't come close to bridging the gap between age pension and actual rental costs. With rent assistance indexed to inflation rather than low-income earners' housing costs, the maximum rate has increased by 136% since 2001. Rents paid by recipients have increased by 193%. The assistance is falling further behind actual costs every single year. Some advocates suggest increasing maximum rent assistance by 50% for singles and 40% for couples. Index it to changes in rents for the cheapest 25% of homes in capital cities, rather than general inflation. Those increases would boost maximum rent assistance by $53 weekly for singles. Additional $2,750 annually would ensure single retirees could afford to spend $350 weekly on rent, enough to access the cheapest 25% of one-bedroom homes across capitals while still affording other essentials. But those changes haven't happened. Current policy settings leave hundreds of thousands of retirees in rental stress with no pathway out. Multiply her situation by millions across Australia. Young professionals, essential workers, anyone without family wealth to leverage. The demographics of retirement crisis are clear. It's not affecting everyone equally. It's affecting younger generations catastrophically, and it's affecting renters most of all. If understanding retirement dynamics provides value, joining the channel supports continued coverage of economic structures affecting Australian households. The healthcare cost bomb. When Australians imagine retirement, they picture travel and relaxation. What they don't picture until it becomes unavoidable is healthcare costs. Medicare covers basics, GP visits if bulk billed, public hospital treatment, subsidised pharmaceuticals through PBS. Sounds comprehensive until you need actual healthcare. Specialist visits cost $300, $400. Medicare rebates $80, $150. Gap $200, $250 per visit. Dermatologist visit $387. Medicare refund $87. You pay $300. Medicare doesn't cover dental, doesn't cover optical beyond basic eye tests, doesn't cover most allied health. Hearing aids not covered. Private hospital choice, need insurance. The real crisis is long-term care. Medicare doesn't cover aged care accommodation or extended nursing home stays. Those costs run thousands monthly. A fall, a diagnosis, gradual mobility decline. Stable retirement becomes financial emergency overnight. Healthcare costs rise precisely when income flexibility disappears. You can't work extra hours, can't switch careers. You're drawing from super that was supposed to last decades. One prolonged medical issue can drain balances far faster than anticipated. Daniel and Grace Park had $440,000 combined super at retirement. Daniel needed heart surgery. Private hospital because public wait was 9 months. Total costs after Medicare and insurance $18,000. Grace developed arthritis requiring specialist care and medications not fully PBS covered. Annual healthcare costs jumped from projected $3,000 to actual $12,000. Their super is depleting 35% faster than planned. They're now 76 with $180,000 remaining. Life expectancy, another 10 to 12 years for Grace, 8 to 10 for Daniel. The mathematics don't work anymore. Retirement plans collapse not because of poor spending habits, but because health doesn't cooperate with financial projections. When healthcare becomes the deciding factor between stability and crisis, comfortable retirement becomes increasingly fragile. The generational divide. The retirement crisis isn't evenly distributed. Each generation entered working life under different conditions. Every shift in policy, every change in economic structure quietly worsened the odds. Baby boomers had it relatively clearest. Many bought property when prices were 3 to 4 times annual income, instead of 8 to 10 times. Employer pensions still existed in public sector and some private companies. Superannuation started just as many hit their peak earning years, allowing decent accumulation periods. Retirement for boomers, while never guaranteed, felt achievable if you followed the conventional path. Work steadily, buy property, contribute to super once it became mandatory. That formula actually worked for many boomers, though far from all. Gen X arrived at a turning point. Property prices were already rising faster than wages when they reached buying age. Employer pensions had mostly disappeared. Super existed throughout their careers, but at lower contribution rates. Initially, many Gen Xers are now approaching retirement with incomplete super balances and ongoing mortgages. 30% of working Australians expect to still be paying mortgages in retirement. Most of those are Gen X and older millennials. Retirement becomes working life by another name because housing debt persists into what should be asset-free years. Millennials face even harsher mathematics. Home ownership rates among 25 to 29-year-olds have fallen to 36%. For 34-year-olds, 50%. Those aren't delayed purchases. They're indications that large portions of millennials will never own property. It currently takes 10.66 years to save a 20% deposit on median price dwellings. The 20-year average is 9 years, but for millennials, the gap keeps widening. By the time they save the deposit, property prices have risen again. The target keeps moving further away. Median home prices hit $831,000 as of June 2025. Wages haven't kept pace. The dwelling value to income ratio makes home ownership mathematically impossible for median income millennials without family financial support. The investment uncertainty. For years, the advice has been simple. Invest in super, stay the course. Time in the market beats timing the market. For earlier generations, that advice generally worked. Today, that reassurance doesn't land the same way. Super funds delivered exceptional returns recently. 9.9% in 2023, 11.4% in 2024, 9.3% in 2025, nearly 35% cumulative growth over 3 years. But those returns are heavily concentrated in technology companies. When gains depend on momentum, instead of broad economic strength, confidence becomes harder. There's also sequence of returns risk. A market downturn early in retirement can permanently damage portfolios. Your balance drops 30%, you're forced to sell at depressed prices, and when markets recover, you own fewer units. A recent survey found 38% of Australians feel anxious about super during volatility. Super remains necessary. There's no alternative, but the margin for error has become painfully thin. One bad stretch at the wrong moment can undo decades of contributions. What retirement actually looks like now. The conversation around retirement needs to shift from what it used to be to what it's realistically becoming. For many Australians, retirement will no longer mean a clean break from work at 67. It won't look like decades of leisure funded by super and pension. Instead, it's evolving into something far more fluid. Retirement is less about stopping work entirely and more about reducing financial pressure. It's about flexibility rather than freedom. Part-time work, consulting, and remote roles are becoming core to how people survive their later years. Not because they love working into their 70s, because full financial independence feels increasingly out of reach. The danger lies in pretending the old model still applies. When expectations don't match reality, people plan poorly. By the time they realize their super won't last, they're past the point where adjustments are viable. Future retirement will demand adaptability. Those who can pivot and downsize expectations will fare better than those clinging to a version of retirement that no longer exists. The crisis is here. Australia's retirement crisis didn't happen by accident. It's the result of policy settings that assumed continuous employment, rising property ownership, and superaccumulation matching lifestyle expectations. Those assumptions have failed for large portions of the population. Median super balances of $54,000, $68,000 don't fund comfortable retirements. Age pension of $31,000 annually doesn't cover rent plus living expenses. Renters face mathematical impossibility trying to fund 25-plus-year retirements on inadequate savings. 1.6 million Australians are already drawing retirement income. 2.5 million more will retire in the next decade. 2/3 of retirees who rent live in poverty. The system isn't just failing at the margins, it's systematically failing to deliver the retirement outcomes it was designed to provide. If this investigation provided value, joining the channel supports continued analysis of economic structures affecting Australian retirement. The retirement crisis isn't coming, it's here, and the next decade will determine whether Australia addresses the structural failures creating it or watches millions more reach retirement without the financial security previous generations took for granted. Thank you for watching till the end. Please subscribe to the channel for more video contents like this. Take care.